They were all concerned about cybersecurity, and it was a first at Stanford University. But what made the congressional boot camp a new hallmark were the players. Senior congressional staff on both sides of the aisle, academics, and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs met to better understand the complex dimensions of cyber threats to the United States and how to combat them. It was an intensive 3-day workshop that included hands-on experience.
We are 3,000 miles away from Washington, which gives us time to think. And we're also ground zero for the technology revolution in our neighborhood here in Silicon Valley.
The boot camp was sponsored by the Center for International Security and Cooperation, known as CSAC, and the Hoover Institution.
Cybersecurity scholarship is siloed, and it's in its infancy. Collaboration across traditional academic disciplines, political science, computer science, economics, law, psychology, isn't just a nice to have, it's a must have.
Co-organizer Herb Lynn took the first step of defining what the cybersecurity threat is.
You have to understand the psychology of the threat. It shows that you have to understand that, the threat, as the threat model changes, your defenses against it change. Shows the importance of psychology, getting the other guy to choose not to do something that would otherwise be bad. So there are all kinds of interesting dimensions to this, and it's a completely non-technical thing.
In laying the groundwork, some basic questions had to be asked. First, where do the bad guys get their information?
That attackers, what's often misunderstood about them is that 95% of the work they do exists in the wild, on the public internet. It doesn't exist in corporate networks.
What comprises an attack?
Deny, degrade, disrupt, destroy, or manipulate. If you are doing one of those things, you are attacking. If you are simply taking data or a copy of data for whatever purpose, I would argue it is an exploitation, computer network exploitation versus computer network attack.
How vulnerable is the United States to cyber attacks?
There is no way to be perfectly secure. You can do anything you want to secure these systems, there will always be another way in. It's impossible to secure these systems, okay? And all it takes is one weak link. If it's one supplier, and you can get the supplier, and they have access to your network, now they're roaming on your network.
Jane Hall-Lute is the former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. She posed 3 important questions.
Question 1, how do we architect systems we can trust from components we can't? Question number 2, how do we preserve the integrity of our information and our identity in an open internet? And question number 3, what will the role of government be? It is a jump ball right now.
While the possibility of massive cyber attacks have been compared to nuclear Armageddon, dealing with them requires a different strategy.
The strategy, what can you do? And if I actually had only one slide, I would have a big flashing red light, and it would say, slow down. Ask yourself the question, what makes this different from the last attack? Not what's alike, but what makes it different?
You have in that space.
There were not only issues of security, but of control. Who decides what we see on the internet became a subject of debate.
Well, the question is who you trust. Do you trust someone in the middle, whether it be your spam filter or Microsoft or Google or Comcast or the US government or the Chinese government to make that decision? Or do I trust me? Which is scarier to you? The institutionalized power or the or the rogue individual?
I feel very confident of even my ability to convince an audience in this town that the idea of an unsurveillable internet is a really bad idea.
There were disclosures about the government sitting between the data centers, snarfing up, collecting large amounts of data.
Other conflicting agendas emerged. The needs of private companies like Microsoft are different from the government. Intrusion is a big worry for business.
Customers said, wow, we can't put our stuff in your data center because we're essentially turning it over to the government. So our response to that was, okay, we're going to encrypt everything everywhere so you can feel safe using our services. And if we didn't respond in that way, we'd have no business.
Trust is essential to compete in the private sector, especially for banking.
When we use our economic strength as a weapon, we all think, well, sanctions, trade sanctions is a good way to bring pressure on countries. But actually you have to consider that that's going to have the same effect as this business of not being able to trust us to keep the data secure. You could result in driving a lot of companies out of the United States.
From that, another theme developed: how to bridge the gap between the government and the private sector.
Once an attack has happened, the private companies, the security vendors, right, have more data than the government because we have all the sensors and we're the ones actually filtering the traffic. And so that's data the government wants to know post-breach, and companies want to know in advance of what's happening. And so we've been unable to bridge that gap. My own company and 3 leading security vendors are launching a sharing consortium to do exactly that, working with our competitors. But for all of us here that spend time in the government, we know that the type of data that's in the government could be immensely powerful.
Silicon Valley worries that the government may not be thinking ahead.
We're thinking about security for that future. And the question is, are government agencies and governments in general thinking that far ahead like we all are? And I think that too often that's not the case. And so, for me, the question is what can the government help us with? What should we be doing on our own? How do we approach security together? And I think that's hopefully when you go back to Washington and you think about how we engage companies, how we engage with government agencies, thinking about the roles we all play.
While there were a lot of differing opinions on cybersecurity,
That is beautiful.
there was unanimous consent on the success of the meeting.
This boot camp has been great because we've been able to establish communication paths with people that we wouldn't otherwise have established communication paths with. We now have people that we can call up in Washington.
What Stanford has done and Hoover has done really successfully here is they've brought together people from DC who won't necessarily talk from different committees, from different sides of the aisle, from different sides of the House and the Senate, and then they brought from the Valley community lawyers, educators, technologists, you name it, from across the spectrum in a way that I've never seen sort of in one place.
I think one of the most important things I've learned is that the leadership from the Hill is very interested in continuing and building dialogue and relationships with folks in the Valley. They recognize the importance of bringing both coasts together, and it was really refreshing to see that.